The past 2 years, I've looked at what music defined the 2010s and the 2000s, and while I may not personally believe in the linear progression of time, it would only make sense to do the 1990s next. I want to see what pop music was on January 1st, 1990, what it was on December 31st, 1999, and see what music got it from point A to point B. Here are the ground rules for what I picked. These are nearly the same for my 2010s and 2000s videos. If you'd like, feel free to pause and read them over. And just so we're all on the same page, there's a really good chance that an artist that you think should be on this list isn't. And if I don't mention some specific piece of music or artist that you think should be on here, please let me know why they should in the comments. Also, check out the playlist I made. It's in the description, okay? So let's kick it all the way back to... Get your jelly shoes and mood rings on because it's 1990. The world is your oyster, except for the recession. Want to go catch a movie? There's Goodfellas, Home Alone, Ghost. Maybe you want to catch some TV shows debuting this year, like The Simpsons on Fox or Seinfeld on NBC. Not to mention, you might have heard about this newfangled thing called the World Wide Web. The first web server launched in Switzerland this year. Or maybe you just want to play some solitaire on your new Windows 3.0 operating system. There are these guys in Germany who are doing research. Cool, right? But forget all of that. What's music like? It's okay. The major narrative about 90s popular music pre-September 24th, 1991 is that it was sterile. Hair metal, power ballads, sonic holdovers from the 80s. And look, was that accurate? Yeah, kinda. But no decade really starts when it starts, you know? It takes time for new ideas and sounds to click with people. Plus, so many classic 90s songs topped the charts in 1990. Wilson Phillips's Hold On was the biggest song of the year. Sinead O'Connor dropped a classic Prince cover. Vanilla Ice. Belle Biv DeVoe was introducing New Jack Swing into the public consciousness. Milli Vanilli was getting famous for Definitely Singing. Mariah Carey made her debut. I'm not going to talk about this record, but I'm going to talk about her later on, don't worry. And beyond those examples, there was also house music, a subgenre of dance music that started out in 1980 Chicago and spent the next couple of years bouncing between cultural capitals of the world, each one tweaking it in their own way. And 3 months into 1990, house music got its biggest spotlight so far. Strike a pose. Let's establish some points for why this song is important. First, the artist. Madonna already had a number of hit albums and singles from the 80s under her belt, so this wasn't her breakthrough by any means. But Vogue was her first hit of the 90s, serving as a single for her classic record, the Dick Tracy movie soundtrack. And it kicked off an imperial decade for Madonna. Everything she touched in the 90s turned to gold. For music, I mean. Second, it represents the genre of house music gaining main steam in the mainstream. More specifically, Vogue pays homage to voguing and the underground queer ball community. These days, there's debate as to whether Madonna was appropriating that culture, but I'm probably not the right person to speak on that. What I will speak on is that Vogue is an insanely good club track. By weaving together house, voguing, nods to old Hollywood icons, a classic video directed by David Fincher. Wait, I don't remember that part. Madonna made an oral love letter to escapism, of going out on that dance floor and leaving everything behind. Strike a pose. There's really nothing to it. All right, let's touch on 1991. Can't touch this. Oh, sorry, Mr. Hammer. I forgot. The Soviet Union dissolved. Terminator 2 came out. The Chicago Bulls won their first NBA title of the decade, thanks in large part to a stellar team led by Michael Jordan. For music, we had Bryan Adams topping the charts with Everything I Do. Metallica released their self-titled Black Album. But there's only two pieces of music from this year I want to focus on, both of which came out in September. First...
Hi, I'm Garth Brooks.
Hi, Garth.
Turns to party, I'm always thirsty.
Next up, we've got Ropin' the Wind. There's two reasons for this pick. First, the absolute, bona fide, industry lad, Garth Brooks. He had already released two other records, and both had established him as a no-nonsense, straight-shootin' classical countryman. At least on the surface. Sure, he was inspired by the likes of George Strait, but he also loved Billy Joel and James Taylor. And when it came to his live shows, he took inspiration from Kiss to create full-on arena spectacles. Garth sought to bring his brand to places no other country artist had been. And oh my god, did that work!
For real, if you look at it purely from sales, Garth Brooks is probably the most successful American recording artist of all time.
Speaking of sales, the second reason why this album is on the list. You see, Ropin' the Wind went straight to number 1 on the Billboard Top 200 album chart when it came out. No surprise there, right? Probably not today, but it was a bit of a surprise back then, and it may not have been possible without one change made earlier in the year. On May 25th, Billboard started using data from Nielsen's SoundScan to make their album charts, and then eventually their singles charts. This was the first time Billboard was using an official database, and Garth was a huge benefactor of that change. Ropin' the Wind was the first time a country artist debuted at number 1 on the Billboard Top 200.
Now you might be wondering, what was Billboard doing before this change to make their charts? And the answer is that they were just calling places up.
Yeah, they would call record stores and just be like, "Sup fools, what's been sellin'?" That's it. Now, I'm not saying the old method had guaranteed bias, but it's worth knowing that rap and country albums started getting to the top of the charts way more often than before, and in turn, those albums being at the top made them even more successful. Rob Harvilla of The Ringer wrote a piece about this change, saying, "Garth and several other artists were already hugely popular, of course, but SoundScan revealed exactly how popular, which of course made all those imperial artists exponentially more popular." And within that article, he talks with fellow writer Chris Melanphy, who says, "Once you realize Garth Brooks is selling better than Mariah Carey and Pearl Jam, and consistently every year, you promote him accordingly. Does Garth Brooks get a Central Park concert in 1997 without SoundScan? Maybe. Maybe not." Let's move on to the next record. Picture this, September 24th, 1991.
I don't know, there was weather probably?
Many consider this to be one of the biggest album release days of all time. You had the mainstream breakthrough of Red Hot Chili Peppers with some of the biggest alt-rock hits of the decade. You had A Tribe Called Quest blowing the lid off hip-hop with a conscious boom-bap masterpiece. You had new records from Primal Scream, Pixies, and Soundgarden. Those albums are all great, and you could certainly argue that one or more of them deserve a spot here. But there's one other record I haven't mentioned yet.
And there's the Emerald City.
The song is called Smells Like Teen Spirit.
You know, I'm always appreciative when someone makes my job easier. The 2010s and 2000s both took a bit of time to figure out their unique sound, and there's definitely room for debate when it comes to what music was the turning point. That was not an issue with the 90s. Musically, the 90s started with Nirvana's Nevermind. Even though it wasn't immediate, despite releasing in September 1991, Nirvana wouldn't truly take off in the US until early the following year. But when it did, oh, there was no looking back. The three-piece unit led by Kurt Cobain got their start in Seattle on the local label Sub Pop, and they helped usher in the decade's first big musical movement, grunge, an offshoot of rock and metal emphasizing emotional angst and slow, sludgy riffs. It was the first truly new sound to come from this decade, or at least the first to get a solid foot in the door. Grunge absolutely dominated the early and mid-1990s, and the music industry did everything they could to capitalize on it. Hell, labels would soon start signing bands solely because they came from the same city as Nirvana.
Yeah, that's the real ingredient for any band success, knowing what the market theater gum wall is.
So there's the entire genre that Nirvana kicked off, but it's worth considering too that Nevermind succeeded because it was a good album. For a band so outwardly against pleasing crowds, they wrote some real crowd pleasers. Tracks like Smells Like Teen Spirit, In Bloom, Come As You Are, they've got hooks that have survived generations, passing down from one set of disaffected youth to another. To quote New Yorker writer Kelefa Sanneh, Nirvana has been so influential for so long that the revolution it inspired now seems preordained. Of course Nirvana, or a band like Nirvana, was going to come along. The move from hair metal to grunge mirrored a broader cultural shift toward more casual styles and attitudes, and so maybe it was inevitable that rock stars would evolve from tight spandex to loose jeans, from revelry to rumination, from high screeches to low moans. 1992. Bill Clinton became president off his 6-sack skill. CDs passed cassettes as the most popular music format, marking the start of the only truly good time in history. Go catch Reservoir Dogs at your local Cineplex, but don't forget to go to the refreshments to pick up a Crystal Pepsi. Nirvana became the biggest band in the whole entire world. That basically signaled the end of hair metal, though Guns N' Roses got one last big hit to send the genre off. Criss Cross made You, and You specifically, jump. Billy Ray Cyrus was getting people to line dance again, and if that wasn't your MO, then you could just go to raves. You could really sense that the 1990s were starting to come into their own. But before we get into the weeds, let's get into the weed.
Yes, I take a hit of the chronic with Dr. Dre. December 15th. Right here, man.
1, 2, 3 into the 4. Snoop Doggy Dogg and Dr. Dre is at the door.
December of 92 saw the release of The Chronic, the debut album by Californian rapper and producer Dr. Dre. Now, even though this was his debut, this was not Mr. Dr. Dre's first stroll around the block. He was part of the seminal rap group NWA, but following that group ceasing to exist in 1991, each member went off to do their own thing. And it turns out, Dr. Dre's thing was making The Chronic. So first, this represents Dre stepping into his own and proving that he didn't need anybody else to be successful. The album also served as a springboard for his label mates at Death Row Records, but none of them benefited as much as Snoop Dogg. For real, he's on 11 of the 16 tracks here. This is almost a collab album. But even beyond Dre and Death Row, the biggest thing that this album accomplished is that it established the sound of West Coast hip-hop for the next few years. Slower beats, melodic synth lines, funk samples even. It was a gangster take on funk, which gave it the name G-Funk.
What everybody's saying.
As someone living at the end of 1992 might say, let's move on to 1993. Jurassic Park, Frasier, Mrs. Doubtfire, The X-Files. The Long Box was discontinued. Oh, you don't know what the long box is? It was a special kind of cardboard container for a CD, initially made to be sold in the same bins as vinyl records. They were super expensive to make, they were terrible for the environment, they were a thing for over a decade. Just incredible. Whitney Houston owned the charts with the soundtrack to the film The Bodyguard. Radiohead dropped Creep and did this. Prince changed his name to this. Those guys in Germany are still doing research. That's pretty cool, right? Maybe we'll find out what that is in a few years. Snoop Dogg followed up his work on The Chronic with his own G-Funk masterpiece, Doggy Style. Between those two records, man, West Coast hip-hop was killing it. No other coastal region could compete at this time. But everything in life needs a yin and a yang, so the East Coast got real and gave us the Wu-Tang.
I smoke all the mic like smoking Joe Frazier, the Hellraiser, raising hell with the flavor.
Enter the Wu-Tang. 36 Chambers was the debut studio album by the Wu-Tang Clan, a 9-person New York group comprised of rap legends like RZA, GZA, Inspectah Deck, Method Man, Old Dirty Bastard, Furby. Where G-Funk sounded clean and luxurious, Wu-Tang sounded rough and rowdy. Dr. Dre rapped about how much cooler he was than you. The Wu-Tang also rapped about how much cooler they were than you, but they wove in references to kung fu movies and comic books. This brokered a new sonic style for New York hip-hop, setting it apart from the likes of other regional acts like A Tribe Called Quest, who also released an album the same day as 36 Chambers. And that style would be imitated by the biggest rappers to emerge from New York in the 90s. But on top of all that, it also gave the East Coast a sound that could sit right on the shelf with the prime cuts of G-Funk. In the butcher shop. Because there was beef. As both coasts now stood firm in their sound, they started going at each other a little bit. This beef wouldn't directly impact the Wu-Tang Clan though. This same year, the New York label Bad Boy Records was founded by Sean Combs, with its first big star being the Notorious B.I.G. And over on the other coast, Death Row released the second album by their new star, Tupac Shakur. This feud would really take shape around those two, but for the sake of efficiency, I'm gonna use 36 Chambers and The Chronic to represent not only the distinct coastal sounds, but also the beginnings of this rap feud that would burn hot for the next few years. Forrest Gump, Pesto Sauce, O.J. Simpson breaks his 45-year no-killing streak. Go chat with strangers on this new site called Yahoo, or maybe even buy books online through Amazon. Watch Pulp Fiction, The Lion King, ER, Friends. Play a game on your new PlayStation 1. Definitely don't spill McDonald's coffee on yourself. Kurt Cobain's tragic death in April signaled a symbolic beginning of the end for grunge. Ace of Base scored big this year with their hit The Sign. It was written by this group of songwriters all the way out in Sweden. Maybe we'll hear about them again at some point. Oh, there was also Woodstock 94. So many big artists came out for this. Bob Dylan, Red Hot Chili Peppers. But there was also this band that got into a mud fight mid-set. Look at these punks getting covered in mud. These guys probably suck.
Sometimes I give myself the creep.
Hey, actually, this kind of slaps. Yeah, put these guys on the list.
Do you have the time to listen to me whine?
1994's Dookie was the breakthrough of Green Day. This three-piece group started out in the San Francisco punk scene, playing at iconic venues like Gilman's. After 2 records, though, they did something unspeakable. They signed to a major label. That's right, they did the worst thing anyone in the 90s could do. Sell out. The signing did make them pariahs to their old community, but as a trade-off, we did get this album, so maybe we let bygones be bygones? Oh yeah, they did let bygones be bygones. That's neat. Nearly 30 years later, Dookie is a great album with hooks that sound as fresh as they did back then. But aside from being just a great album, it also helped introduce a new sound of rock to the mainstream. Pop punk. Like grunge, pop punk encapsulated young angst, but the delivery was less depressed and more immature, expressing a worldview that boiled down to finding ways to keep yourself from being bored, or even just singing about being bored. Much like Nirvana, Green Day tapped into adolescent apathy with off-the-cuff insight and stellar hooks.
There used to be a graying tower alone.
A good way to know when a decade gets good is when you get your Batman movie tie-in song from Seal. The 90s got theirs in 1995. We're still waiting for the rest of the decades to catch up. Cinemas were packed with films like Jumanji, Clueless, and A Goofy Movie. And if you're not a fan of 2D animation, might I suggest the first ever computer animated feature film? Michael Jordan was back in basketball after a brief stint in baseball, and more eyes were on golf thanks to a 19-year-old upstart named Tiger Woods. Alanis Morissette dominated hearts and minds with Jagged Little Pill. TLC told us not to go chasing waterfalls. The Macarena existed. The West Coast and East Coast were still beefing pretty hard, but the South had something to say, according to these two Outcast guys. And if you were worried about the surviving members of Nirvana, don't fret. The drummer Dave Grohl started this new band called Foo Fighters.
Lots of things going on this year. Anyway, here's Wonderwall.
Today is gonna be the day that I highlight this song from British rock band Oasis. Now, Oasis was no ordinary rock band, nor did they exist at a normal time for British music. This group, led by the brothers Gallagher, made their debut earlier in the decade with the album Definitely Maybe, and it had everyone heralding them as the new saviors of rock and roll. With the release of Wonderwall and their second album Morning Glory, Oasis got to dominate British popular music, holding it entirely as their own. Except, I don't know about this, this might just be a personal thing, but what about those times when you feel heavy metal? If Oasis wasn't making you feel supersonic, then there were also these Blur dudes, and they also had some great songs and albums coming out. Oh, I'm sorry, are we in a butcher shop? Because I'm smelling beef again! This battle dominated the UK music press in 1995, and it all centered around a new sound for the 90s. One of the largest musical exports from the UK this decade was Britpop, basically their response to grunge. But the sound wasn't like grunge, it was far more upbeat and wry. Nirvana knew a dirty word. Blur would rattle off references to UK life that sound completely foreign to me. Like, come on, guys. The hell's a pigeon? Which band truly won? Sales-wise, Blur won the battle, but in my own personal opinion, Oasis won the war. And then Blur's lead singer Damon Albarn went on to just win everything. But while the bands were sworn to battle, the overall sound of Britpop was one that led everyone to come together, uniting for one sweet day. Which reminds me...
Please welcome Mariah, Carey, and Boyz II Men.
Sorry, I never told you.
Okay, so this one is an interesting conundrum. One Sweet Day is a collaboration between two titans in the R&B field, Mariah Carey and Boyz II Men. It is probably not the first song you would think of for either artist, yet it was the longest charting #1 song on the Billboard Hot 100 up until a few years ago. I think this is just another example of how every successful thing in the 90s was obscenely successful, even if its lasting impact was limited. Hi, Garth. So this song comes down to its two artists. First, let's talk about Mariah Carey. She had made her debut back in 1990, like I mentioned before, and she would have several big hits before and after One Sweet Day. There were and are very few vocalists in history that could match her wide expression and enormous vocal range. I will also use Mariah Carey to represent the wave of 90s pop divas, but that doesn't mean I want to diminish the work of other stellar singers from this time. Like, I could never disrespect Whitney Houston. She's every woman. It's all in her. It's just a byproduct of how I try to keep these retrospectives as efficient as possible. The second artist is Boyz II Men, a group of Philly dudes modeled after the 80s group New Edition. Their formula for combining Motown sensibilities with stunning multi-part vocal harmonies made them a massive success in the 90s. Hell, this song broke the Billboard record they set with End of the Road, and that one broke the record set by I'll Make Love to You. Boyz II Men were the most popular pop group of the early to mid 90s, and the only band that kept them from being the most popular group of any genre was Nirvana. So One Sweet Day represents their rise to fame as well, but it also represents how they would impact the rest of the 90s, specifically when we start to see boy bands modeled after Boyz II Men. Now, I wouldn't really consider Boyz II Men a boy band. I mean, how could they? Their name implies an ongoing metamorphosis from Boyz II Men. The title wouldn't work. But even still, they laid down the blueprint for the boy bands we would see in just a few years.
If you ask any of the groups that we're talking about, whether it's Backstreet Boys or NSYNC or obviously 90 Degrees, I think that every single one will tell you that Boyz II Men was a huge influence on them.
Time for my favorite 1996 activities, like playing my Nintendo 64, getting a call on my Motorola StarTAC, and meeting up with friends to see Mission Impossible or Independence Day. Dolly the sheep was born as the first mammal cloned from an adult cell, raising ethical concerns on the future of cloning. Tickle Me Elmo came out during Christmas. These are clearly of equal importance. Janet Jackson became the highest paid musician in history with an $80 million deal with Virgin Records, but not everything this year was positive for music. The East and West Coast feud reached a tipping point as Tupac was killed in Las Vegas after a boxing match. So many insane cultural moments happened this year. I mean, for real, what more would you want?
Yo, tell you what I want, what I really, really want. I wanna really wanna zig a zig ah.
Oh, of course, a zig ah. So stupid.
If you want to be my lover, you gotta get with my opinion that the Spice Girls are a decade-defining act. The group formed back in 1994 from an open audition. The managers in charge wanted a girl group that could compete with the growing number of UK boy bands at the time. However, after a year or so of managerial frustration, the Spice Girls left and made a new deal with Simon Fuller, i.e. the guy who eventually started American Idol. Wannabe then was their introduction to the world, and what a perfect intro it was, pairing infectious bubblegum pop with a strong message of female friendship, which would essentially be the Spice Girls' way for their entire career. But like with every other entry on this list, the importance of Wannabe extends past the Spice Girls. As they charted their cultural ascent, they laid down a foundation for not just girl groups, not just teen pop, but pop in general. That's right, Britpop is dead, long live British pop. As Katie Weaver wrote for the New York Times, while this ethos that girls are good and deserve positive ideas was not complex, girl power boiled it down to an almost petroglyphic essence, enabling it to fit neatly on pencil cases, notebooks, and t-shirts. It quickly became an affirmation, something the Spice Girls and their very young fans could yell to celebrate the Spice Girls and their very young fans. And to be clear, I do not intend to bash the Spice Girls for their use of marketing. If anything, I intend to praise it. More so than any other 90s act aside from probably Nirvana, being a fan of the Spice Girls explicitly meant something. After a half-decade dominated by alt-rock, hip-hop, and R&B, pop was making a real comeback. If you want its future, forget its past. The Spice Girls were pop's future.
If you wanna be my lover,
I get knocked down, but I get up again.
Another way of telling when a decade gets good is when you get a hit song from an anarchist punk band from the UK. You guys need to pick up the slack. Titanic obliterated box office records, joined by a hit Celine Dion song. Men in Black was also a huge success, joined by a hit Will Smith song. Don't like music or movies? Have fun with words then, I guess. The first Harry Potter book came out this year. Shania Twain became the next great country star with her smash hit of an album, Come On Over. As the music industry was still reeling from Tupac's death, Biggie was killed just 6 months later. Aqua released Barbie Girl, which got them sued by Mattel. That case was dismissed, but then Aqua's label filed a countersuit. The judge overseeing the cases dismissed it again, stating, and this is a direct quote, "The parties are advised to chill." But I have no interest in Barbie girls or Barbie worlds. I've got another song I want to focus on.
And this one is gonna be a bit weird. I think if you're gonna have an issue with any of the picks from this list, it's probably going to be this one, but just hear me out on this.
I am sitting in the morning at the diner on the corner.
Tom's Diner by Suzanne Vega did not come out in the 1990s. It was released in 1987. There was a remix back in 1990 which became a big hit, but I'm not talking about that version. I'm talking about the original.
So that begs the question of why this song?
Well, to explain that, we're gonna have to go to those guys in Germany. You see, one of those guys was Karl-Heinz Brandenburg. All the way back in the early 80s, he started work on building a process for digitally transmitting audio data, something that was, at the time, basically impossible. But he kept working on it for years, and by a certain point, others started seeing the same technological potential that he did. In the late 80s, a team including Karl-Heinz was put together to create a standard for audio encoding in the internet age, the Moving Picture Experts Group, or MPEG. They got to work creating different layers to this new codec. Layers 1 and 2 were easy enough to make and would be used for applications involving both audio and video. But the audio-only layer 3 was trickier. It was the most complex, requiring high-fidelity audio to pass through very low bit rates. In order to test it, they needed a reference song, and they picked Tom's Diner, mainly because its a cappella nature made it easy to tell when the codec was degrading Suzanne's vocals too much.
I am sitting in the morning at the diner on the corner. I am sitting in the morning at the diner on the corner.
After a few more years of testing, they officially unveiled the MPEG Audio Layer 3, or the MP3.
But all of that was happening from the 80s to the mid-90s. Why is 1997 important?
Because here's the thing, the idea with the MP3 at the time was that the encoding tools would be unavailable to the public, but the decoding tools would be free to use. If the public at large was able to not just access MP3s, but create and share them, that would be pretty bad for the music industry, wouldn't it? Then, in 1997, all that went to hell. As Karl-Heinz put it to NPR, some Australian college student figured out the encoding software and uploaded it to a random US university site for anyone to download. The MP3 was leaked. Karl-Heinz and his team did everything they could from there to stop this from happening, and once it became clear that they couldn't stop it, they went to convince the people who this would affect the most, the music industry. Now, on one hand, it's worth recognizing the absolute trash fire of a hand MPEG and the music industry were just handed. But on the other hand, when Karl-Heinz explained what was coming and how to prepare, music executives didn't listen. In his book, How Music Got Free, author Stephen Witt describes a meeting Karl-Heinz had with the Recording Industry Association of America, or RIAA. He outlined the threat that the MP3 could pose if it ran wild, but the RIAA didn't budge. Part of that was because they were a lobbying organization and not in control of any labels, but they also had concerns that Karl-Heinz's solution would require them to pony up the cash. Oh, also, their tech people, their engineers, hated the MP3 and didn't want a format that would sacrifice the CD's audio fidelity. Hey, guys, I love my WAV files as much as the next Qobuz user, but, and this is just me personally speaking, this is just my own opinion, I would not tank my entire industry because of it. Plus, the industry was still raking in ludicrous profits, which of course meant that they would always rake in ludicrous profits. They made the long box, they were never gonna fail. But that would change very soon, in 2 years to be specific. In fact, I'm going to be slightly hyperbolic right now. Every failure of the music industry from the past 2 decades stems from what happened in 1997. Before the MP3 apocalypse consumes us all, though, let's move into 1998. The former head of the Soviet Union starred in a Pizza Hut ad. The first MP3 player was released. Bill Clinton did not have sexual relations with that woman, but he actually did. If that sounds like a lot of stuff to remember, don't worry. You could easily look it all up with this new search engine thing called Google. You know, it's been a while since we've checked in on rock music. Let's see what they're up to. In fall of 1998, Korn released Follow the Leader, an album that made them household names in the world of, rock? Or metal. Maybe rap a little bit too. Whatever this thing is, it's different. Follow the Leader was arguably the mainstream breakthrough of a new subgenre of metal, called nu metal. What makes it new is the influences from other genres, like alternative rock, and most notably hip-hop. To say nu metal was the continuation of grunge feels kinda wrong to me. Sure, there's enough similar between them, especially with post-grunge acts like Creed, but a direct comparison doesn't sit right with me. However, I think it's interesting to see how the two genres, plus pop-punk, reflect how anger and angst were portrayed in 90s music. Nirvana's angst was musically clear, but lyrically vague and almost passive. The chorus of "Here we are now, entertain us" comes to mind. Green Day's angst was also passive, but pop-punk put a pep in its step. Nu metal is not passive. It's aggressive and in your face. It refuses to sit still and stay silent. In fact, I'd rather view nu metal less as a progression in rock and more as a reaction to pop. Over the next few years, pop would become far more sanitized and kid-friendly. If you were looking to release anger and frustration through music, you wouldn't go to boy bands or teen idols. You would wanna, as one very popular nu metal band would later say, and much of that appeal was present in Follow the Leader. It remains a tentpole record in a genre that would take up much of the charts in the late 90s. And now for something completely different.
Do you believe in life after love?
Why, yes, I do, Cher. I also believe that this song of yours was a bit of a miracle. Believe was the lead comeback single for Cher, formerly of Sonny and Cher. It was her shift to dance music, not unlike the one Madonna did way back in 1990. Of course, the circumstances for these songs was different. Cher's shift was in response to her last album commercially failing. She needed something new if she wanted to stay culturally relevant, and dance music seemed like just the thing. And it worked out very well, as Believe was and still is an insanely catchy pop track. Take a listen here.
So sad that you're leaving.
Hey, cool vocal effect. Burn it at the stake.
Cher used Auto-Tune, a kind of pitch processing software that can be cranked to inhuman levels of accuracy. It was introduced to the public 2 years prior and was mainly intended to, correct less than perfect vocals. But on Believe, the plainly audible use of Auto-Tune came off more as an artistic decision, in the same way vocalists would use a talkbox or a vocoder. So Cher not only used new technology to her advantage, but she helped usher in the use of Auto-Tune for other artists. And also usher in the age of auto-tune being used as a catch-all phrase for lazy artists, but hey, you win some, you lose some. No matter what, this gamble paid off, as Believe would become the biggest song of the next year. Speaking of the next year... Society had long been waiting for the fifth Mambo, and 1999 ushered in a glorious new age for mankind. I can't think of a bigger pop culture event from this year.
Somebody once told me the world is gonna roll me.
I take everything back. The first of the Star Wars prequels released this year, or if you wanted something new, take the red pill and check out The Matrix. The world almost ended because computer couldn't change number. The rap world was exploding because of Dr. Dre's new protege, this dude from Detroit named Eminem. Eiffel 65 somehow invented music this year, which makes the last 9 years pretty embarrassing. Woodstock 99 was an all-out mess, with this big nu metal band Limp Bizkit leading the festival. And of course, there was Napster, which launched in June of this year. The audio file sharing platform that would bring the music industry to its knees.
So at this point, at the end of the 90s, where is pop music?
No thank you. Britney Spears had gotten her start in entertainment as part of the Mickey Mouse Club, alongside young people like Christina Aguilera, Ryan Gosling, future boy band leader and doer of that, Justin Timberlake. Following that gig, she decided to step out as her own artist. Her debut album, Baby One More Time, and its bevy of hits established Britney Spears as a bona fide star. Despite everything that would come to pass in the next decade, Britney became and remains a dominant figure in pop music history. The title track, Sometimes, You Drive Me Crazy, all became massive hits throughout the world. But this record doesn't just earn its spot because of Britney. We also need to look at who's behind the scenes, because the songwriters for this album weren't from LA, they weren't even from America. They came from Sweden. More specifically, Cher Studios, the absolute hit-making machine for any major artist in the late 90s. They had been making a name for themselves starting with Ace of Base's The Sign, and the late 90s was where the collective scored their biggest hits. Along with Britney, they worked with the top boy bands of the time, Backstreet Boys and NSYNC. But even more specifically, much of Baby One More Time was the work of one of Cher's newest members, Max Martin. If you are even a little familiar with the world of pop songwriting, you know who Max Martin is. His songwriting credits cover some of the most popular and evergreen pop songs ever made, and his total of #1 hits is second only to John Lennon and Paul McCartney. Baby One More Time represents the pinnacle of 90s teen pop. The same road paved by the Spice Girls had become a well-traveled main street. One last hit before the 90s came to a close.
Hit me, baby, one more time.
So what does pop music sound like in the year 2000? Well, everyone still played like it was the 90s. Boy bands, girl groups, nu metal, rap, ballads. But of course, we know how the story would progress from here. Napster would flip the music industry on its head and eradicate the concept of paying for music. Timbaland, digital downloads, the Neptunes, Bing Bang, streaming, so on and so forth. The 2000s onward had their fair share of rough times for the music industry, which is why I feel that so many look back on the 90s like some perfect paragon of popular culture. But that nostalgia isn't limited to just the music.
When something existed in the 90s, it felt like the biggest possible version of that thing.
Movies broke box office records, TV shows became cultural landmarks, and music created massive followings. The 1990s felt like the decade to end all decades.
And let's be honest with ourselves, the 90s were not some perfect decade. I haven't even touched on the ongoing AIDS crisis, the multiple bombings, Columbine, the 92 LA riots, and a bunch of other bad things that did happen this decade.
But there's still a romanticism around the 90s that still holds strong to this day, for reasons that Chuck Klosterman lays out in his book, The 90s. Now the 1990s seemed like a period when the world was starting to go crazy, but not so crazy that it was unmanageable or irreparable. It was the end of the 20th century, but also to an age when we controlled technology more than technology controlled us. People played by the old rules despite a growing recognition that those rules were flawed. It was a good time that happened long ago, although not nearly as long ago as it seems.